We focus on multi-sector policy, systems, and environmental change to improve population health and equity. I'm joined at the controls here today by Holly Calhoun, who's our Food Systems Working Group Coordinator, and Carla Blackmar, our Program Coordinator. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items before we start. I wanted to let everyone know that we're going to be keeping the audio lines open. We want to hear from everybody during the question and answer and discussion section, which is at the end of our hour. And we're really interested in making this, an informal discussion. It's a great opportunity to come together as a, just a brief learning community to share your own experiences, ask questions, and hear from each other. So again, while we do want to hear from you during that discussion, because your lines will be open, that background noise may be distracting. So please go ahead and mute yourself using the green square with a microphone in it when you're not speaking. If you joined the audio on the webinar via your computer, you'll need a microphone to speak. And if you joined by telephone, just make sure you enter the audio pin displayed on your control panel, so that we'll be able to hear you. So feel free to send us a question in the control panel if you have any issues joining in. And if you're feeling a little shy, you can also submit questions for the panelists by typing them in throughout the presentations. I wanted to let you also know that we're recording today's webinar. We'll be posting the recording in the slides as well as a few associated resources on our website, and we'll be sending you out a follow-up email with that information. So please go ahead and share the link with colleagues who you think might be interested and not able to join us today. So just a quick run through the agenda before we dive in. We've had a lot of great interest in this topic from our environmental health colleagues around the region. The hexavalent chromium standard went into effect last year, so now is really a great time to take a step back and explore what the implementation of that looks like on the ground. One of our core questions for today is really, where is the balance between the protection of public health and the substantial costs associated with meeting the standard? So we're going to have a chance to dive into that. First of all, we're going to hear from Dr. Eric Miguelino with the State Board to learn a little bit more about the standard itself, the rationale behind it, how it came to be. And then we'll have the opportunity to hear both from representatives of large and small water utilities with perspectives on implementing the standards from both of those perspectives, as well as the broader question of balancing the restrictions on drinking water quality with limitations of practical implementation. So again, after that, we'll have a great little discussion and wrap up the hour. So just take a moment to more properly introduce our speakers. We have a stellar lineup today of really inspiring speakers. So I'm really excited to be introducing all three of these people. Again, first of all, Dr. Eric Miguelino is a research scientist for the state of California, and he works in the Data and Toxicology Office of the Division of Drinking Water at the State Water Resources Control Board. That office focuses on collection and evaluation of regulated contaminants in drinking water, performed in certified laboratories for public water systems in order to maintain compliance. So he advises staff and management on scientific and technical matters associated with drinking water contaminants, and he also assists in the development of MCLs, or maximum contaminant levels, in accordance with the federal and California Safe Drinking Water Acts. Since he joined the state in 2009, he served as a risk assessor for the Department of Pesticide Regulation and as a regulatory scientist in the Department of Public Health. Our next speaker is Edgar Dimely, a senior environmental specialist with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. Mr. Dimely serves widely as a water quality leader, including roles as vice chair of the Association of California Water Agencies Water Quality Committee, a board member of Tree People, as well as the California-Nevada section of the American Waterworks Association and the LA section of the American Society of Civil Engineers. So a great breadth of perspective and engagement there. And our final speaker today is Adán Ortega, who is Executive Director of the California Association of Water Mutual Companies, which is the voice of small water systems in California. Mr. Ortega is a noted expert on a wide range of topics, including water, agriculture, public accountability, and community empowerment at the local and national scales. He's held a wide number of positions and is also founder and principal at the public affairs consulting firm Adán Ortega Associates. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and turn the floor over to Dr. Eric Miguelino to kick us off. And thanks again so much to all three of you.
Good morning, everybody. Let's see if I can get this rolling right here. I hope everybody sees this properly.
Looks great.
Okay, great. So my presentation is called Hexavalent Chromium Regulation. Although it's titled that, really it's the regulatory process with a highlight on hexavalent chromium. So it basically gives you an overview of how things are done using hexavalent chromium as an example. So let's go ahead and get this started. Basically, our program is basically charged with coming up with maximum contaminant levels for drinking water. Those usually revolve around the public health goals, and I'm going to go into that in the next slide. But they usually revolve around the public health goals that are created by the Office of Environmental Health Hazard here at Cal EPA. In regards to Chromium-6, okay, the thing is with this MCL thing, the Chromium-6 MCL was the last, the Chromium-6 MCL regulation was the last act that was performed when we were with CDPH. Now that we've moved to the State Water Resource Control Board, we're on to bigger and better things, as well as focusing still on trying to make that happen with Chrome 6. But what I'm trying to say is our duties have not changed at all, okay? Okay, I want to go into the public health goal, okay, because it's important to understand how the MCL is actually made. The MCL, like I said, focuses on the public health goal. We try to get as close as we can to the public health goal, okay, and that's based on the technical and economic feasibility, okay. Just because the Office of Health Hazard and Assessment, I'm going to just call them a WEHA, it's going to be easier that way. Just because a WEHA comes up with a number doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to always match it. Sometimes we cannot even detect to the level that to the number that they deem as a risk. Okay. Now, when we discuss the public health goal, the public health goal is what we call a negligible risk. They're looking at the most vulnerable population. Okay. They are looking at a cancer risk. Specifically for Chromium-6, we're looking at the cancer risk. So the number that you see there, basically the one that they gave, which is 0.02, okay, that's the public health goal, 0.02 parts per billion. The negligible health risk is no more than one person in a population of 1,000 developing cancer. Now, again, we're talking about a vulnerable population. The public health goal doesn't go in the opposite direction, and it doesn't look at the strongest person. It looks at the most vulnerable person. And in doing so, it basically protects everybody. If we can get as close as we can to the public health goal, then we protect most everybody. So that's the reason why they go for the most vulnerable population. So that's where the public health goal comes into play. Okay. Now with the MCL regulation and Chrome 6, when we developed that, okay, there were very important points that we had to look at. One is how low could we go, and basically how low could we monitor or detect, I should say, that constituent. So we had to look at detection levels. We had to find out the best available technologies, and we wanted to find out how much it would cost. How much would it cost water systems to do these things? The thing is, and that's what we talk, Katie mentioned it, we're kind of talking about a balance. The thing is, you got to have, the thing is, that's a tricky thing for us, because we're, in the, the Division of Drinking Water, we're stuck between, you know, a rock and a hard place. The Office of Health Hazards and well, OEHA comes up with the public health goal, and we come up, typically we end up with a number that's higher than that, and we have to explain that. So that's where, you know, risk communication comes into place. But just to explain how we get there, we look at occurrence data. So we try to see how many, I mean, basically, is it natural forming? Is it man-made? You know, how many water systems are affected by it? What kind of costs would be, you know, what kind of costs would be involved using what we know as the best available technologies? I mean, how often would we have to monitor it? Those costs come into play. And the most important part is when you get that number, how many people are going to be affected, or what's the, you know, the potential of, you know, of affecting these people? I mean, in regards to health risk. Okay. So the MCL and the Chrome 6 regulation. So in regards to the MCLs, even when after we've derived the number, okay, every 5 years we have to revisit them. So the thing is, we do know that technology changes. We do know that costs can sometimes improve or actually, you know, go up. So the thing is, we always have to look. I mean, we always have to keep our eye on the ball. So every 5 years, and it could come sooner, because if a public health goal changes, or the water board deems something that is deems a constituent more dangerous than what it is, or less dangerous, which would be probably not, almost never. But the thing is, more dangerous. The thing is, that MCL can actually be changed. So there's a lot of factors that go into place when we're looking at not just Chrome 6, but just in general, MCLs. Okay. Now, there are two numbers in one regulation. This is what I try to drive home to on a lot of the talks that I do. One number, which is the MCL, is a regulation. The public health goal is a guideline. I mean, that's the brass ring. That's what we're going to try to shoot for. I mean, in my opinion, basically, if something is a carcinogen, just like the EPA does it, they would automatically mark it as a public health goal of 0, because they don't want it in the water. Well, we really don't want it in the water either. I mean, ideally, we would like to remove it if we could. But what OEHA tries to do for us is they try to give us a number to tell us when, I mean, or what would be the negligible risk. That's why we end up with a number that is obviously greater than 0 and not 0. Okay. Okay, two numbers in one regulation. The PHG is not a boundary line between safe and dangerous level. I'm going to read this. Level of a contaminant, and drinking water can still be considered acceptable for public consumption, even if it contains contaminants at levels exceeding the public health goal. Now, we didn't write this. This is actually in the public health goal document in regards to writing a public health goal. This is an OEHA statement. And it's important to understand this, because the thing is, I mean, they're using safe and dangerous in the same line here, and a boundary between the two. So the bottom line is people are always asking, is my water, I mean, the bottom line is my water safe to drink? And as I explained before, there are a number of factors that are used. Remember, the thing is, when OEHA makes the public health goal, and I'm not going to go into it too far, because the thing is, that's not our part here at the Water Resource Control Board or the Division of Drinking Water. But when they write the public health goal, they have to take into consideration all the studies, all the exposure studies, and they may be on humans, but mostly on animals. So the thing is, there's quite a bit of extrapolation there that occurs. So there are safety factors that are built in there. And I don't want to call them levels of uncertainty. I want to call them health protection factors, because the thing is, we're not sure whether or not how we're going to respond to it versus an animal. So the thing is, there's a huge difference there. So those public health factors are put in there. There are factors such as the amount of water that a person drinks. They cite on the air of caution, and expect a person to drink much more or on the higher range, so that way they can protect everybody. Again, this is, like I said, protecting the most vulnerable population means you're protecting everybody. So that's why the public health goal number gets very, very low. But that's just my opinion on what I understand of the public health goal and how I read their documents. So I'm going to go on to the next one. And this is just more of a dramatic slide because people sometimes don't understand this. And I bring this slide to presentations, to small communities to explain this. The rest of the United States is at 100, and that's not this is all in regards to hexavalent chromium. Okay, the rest of the country is at 100 parts per billion. That's any chromium. That's total chromium. So it can be up to 100 parts per billion, potentially up to 100 parts per billion of chromium-6 anywhere else in the country. But in our state, it's 10. Obviously, it's not 10 everywhere yet because the thing is there are some issues with compliance, which we're working hard on. We're working very hard on. But the thing is, it's a dramatic difference. Imagine we were compliant last year in July. We were compliant at 50. Okay, almost all the water systems were compliant at 50 parts per billion. That's total. So the thing is, we were still half of the rest of the United States. So the thing is, in regards to tightening it up, the thing is, that's what we're shooting to do. We've actually separated, we're speciated basically the chromium. So now we have the chromium-3 and 6 together as a total, and chromium-6 just by itself. So it's pretty amazing. Now, July 1st last year, the MCL for chromium-6, that's when it became effective. It is the only one in the nation. So the thing is, we're actually leading the nation in regards to this. Because of that, we lowered our potential exposure by 80% just within our state, and 90% over the federal limit, as compared to the federal limit, I should say. Now, as I said before, we're having some water systems, the smaller systems, some of the larger systems are having problems with compliance. And so the thing is, we're working hard with that. And the thing is, the governor recognized that by signing SB 385 into effect. That allows our talented engineers to work with the water systems in order to design a compliance plan or go over a compliance plan and have the water board accept it and work towards getting that compliance. So that's where we're at in regards to Chrome 6. And that's pretty much it for my presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Eric Miguelino from the State Water Board. That was a really clear and helpful presentation. We'll go ahead and turn the floor over to Edgar Dimely, Senior Environmental Specialist with the Metropolitan Water District, to share with us a little bit about what this is like from the perspective of a large water utility.
Thanks, Katie. As soon as I get control, I'll get started. Oh, I guess I do have control now. Okay, thanks.
Great.
I will try not to duplicate too much of what Dr. Miguelino talked about, and although I do have some duplicative slides in my presentation, I'll just go over them really quickly and highlighting just on the kind of implementation of the Chromium-6 standards. And again, I apologize if there's some overlap. But with that, let's get started. I should have taken these slides out, but again, we know that there's a Chromium-6 regulation and a Chromium-6 standard. Eric mentioned that previously, who it applies to. I think one of the things that, in terms of implementation, that was important was this issue of monitoring and compliance. A number of water systems in California had previous data on chromium-6, and the regulation did allow them to grandfather some of that data in if they chose. The issue of analytical methods was important, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I think that's important because I think what Eric had suggested in the previous slide was that there was a chromium-6 standard. It was a default standard in total chromium. And some people will ask, well, why does California need a different standard from the rest of the country? That's a question that I think larger policy makers will need to address. Again, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but chromium-6 is a known problem. It's been an issue for many years with public health officials. We know where it comes from. We know what it does. Again, chromium-6 is a known carcinogen when inhaled or through inhalation. And again, we've known that for many, many years. Not an issue in terms of the problems that it causes. Again, prior to the adoption of a chromium-6 standard, there was no drinking water standard for chromium-6 per se. It was regulated through total chromium. And again, a mixture of chromium-3, which was about 93%, and then chromium-6 was approximately 7%. Basically, and again, Adán will probably focus on this, a lot of the concern was brought to a head through a series of kind of public focus, principally driven through the Aaron Brockovich movie, or Aaron Brockovich, and it resulted in a change in state law to develop a chromium-6 standard. I tried to summarize that in the bill there. The focus was that while the chromium-6 standard basically didn't take that long to develop, it was the PHG, and again, Eric spoke about that in the previous presentation. I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Just for background, I borrowed these slides from a colleague of mine with Coachella Valley, Steve Bigley, who's their regulatory compliance manager, and we'll talk a little bit more about Coachella Valley situation. Chromium-6 again is very abundant. Steve has indicated here's the 9th most abundant compound in the Earth's crust. Exists both as chromium-3 and chromium-6 in water, mostly chromium-6 in groundwater, and then it's a result of natural erosion of sediments from the Earth's crust. And again, there is man-made chromium-6 contamination, mostly from industrial sources. The infamous case of chromium-6 contamination in Hinckley is from the use of chromium-6 solution to deposit scalants on cooling towers. Again, chromium-6 has known health concerns. It's carcinogenic when inhaled, and again, that's been known for many, many years. Also, I mentioned quite a bit about Coachella Valley has been the subject of a lot of the focus of chromium-6 because at the levels that we've been talking about, they've had chromium-6 naturally occurring in their groundwater. And again, you can see that in this slide here. They range from less than 1 part per billion to as high as 22 parts per billion, and as you can see, above 10 parts per billion, a number of their domestic water wells are going to be out of compliance, which represents quite a challenge for their water utility. I have some slides on some of the other occurrence issues and kind of what was the driver. I don't want to spend too much time on that. I think clearly what this next series of slides represents is kind of the pathway to where we are today. Again, you've had a known Chromium 6 has been regulated for a number of years through federal drinking water standards. Is widespread natural occurrence, not just in California, but throughout the state, or throughout the country, rather. California chose to regulate. There's been quite a bit of question over the PHG and actually the mode of action. Again, that has been a series of some debate and some continuing debate at the national level. And again, with significant pressure from different forces, they ultimately did develop a drinking water standard, as was discussed earlier, at 10 parts per billion. Now, I wanted to talk about what is being done to treat it with a standard in place, systems that have to comply with sources of chromium will have to treat the water. Again, the early treatment work focused on reduction of chromium 6 to chromium 3 through a number of different processes. I don't want to spend too much time on that. If we have time, we can go back on it. But again, this chemical reduction is the preferred method of treating high chromium 6 water, basically to reduce chromium 6 to chromium 3 and then stabilizing it. In addition to developing a standard, a state has to develop what's known as a best available technology, or BAT. Part of the early work that was done on treatment was looking at what is the most effective and cost-effective way of treating. Again, a number of utilities, local, most notably Glendale, focused on a lot of that work. And again, ion exchange, again, there's both the weak base ion exchange and then a reduction that we talked about earlier is being identified. There's other types of treatment, reverse osmosis, which quite simply is very, very expensive. And then the strong base anion exchange is very expensive and difficult because you have this issue of treatment residuals. And I think Adán is going to talk about that following my presentation. I mentioned before Coachella Valley Water District with a Chromium 6 standard at hand. One of the larger water systems that was impacted is Coachella Valley. They were forced with having as much as half of their groundwater wells out of compliance. They put a lot of time and effort in looking at an overall treatment strategy, and a lot of folks will look at them because they are having to address the full kind of panoply of different compliance issues. Designing systems, implementing them, they'll have to almost certainly raise their rates and look for additional monies to build facilities, and then implement them in a timely fashion without facing the specter of being out of compliance with a primary drinking water standard. Again, that's just a graphic on a chromium 6 removal by ion exchange, which is probably will be the preferred method. Don't want to spend too much time on that. But the issue that a lot of folks will focus on is this issue of cost, and additional control measure that some people have looked at outside of treatment is the issue of compliance at the tap. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of point of use, point of entry devices. Again, Coachella and other systems, principally some small water systems, have looked at that. That is very costly and is not viewed as being reliable. Actually, bottled water has been proposed as an alternative to costly treatment. that is not acceptable because providing, drinking water again through bottled water is not reliable or sustainable. It's very, very expensive. Again, Coachella Valley is taking a look at some of those costs, and again, it's very, very expensive. Is kind of the takeaway message. From the federal standpoint, again, I think what was mentioned in the previous presentation, that the feds while they've looked at Chromium 6 in terms of regulation, they have not chosen to change that so far. They've looked at amending the Safe Drinking Water Act to include a Chromium 6 regulation. They've gone through a series of monitoring that might potentially examine it, but I think the short message here is that that's going to be very difficult, again, given some of the political challenges in Washington, D.C. I think in short, while the feds have been looking at Chromium 6, it's not very likely that you will see a change in their total Chromium standard or any individual regulation of Chromium 6. The next few slides in my presentation will focus on the costs for smaller water systems, which will segue to Adán's presentation. One of the other systems in California, which has actually become kind of a poster child for Chromium 6 regulation, has been the city of Watsonville. They have a number of wells that have been impacted by Chromium 6, and I've included some graphics to try and focus on the cost of compliance and the expense of treating for this particular constituent. Some of these are relatively self-explanatory, but the takeaway message, again, what they've been trumpeting to lawmakers and other folks, is that it's very, very expensive to treat this particular constituent, particularly for a small water system. Whether they utilize the reduction or anion exchange, it's going to be very expensive, and they have no other alternative but to pass this cost on to their customers, and they have a very, very a relatively small system with a number of disadvantaged communities. It's going to be very difficult, and as I mentioned before, very expensive to comply with this. Again, these numbers are from the city of Watsonville, and their response to the regulation is as much as 78% rate increase to address the compliance issue within the city. And again, they kind of list both the cost of compliance and the cost of non-compliance. Again, they also focused on what they were looking at versus California and the rest of the United States in terms of the economics for disadvantaged communities, and again, comparing Watsonville with California and the rest of the United States. So I wanted to include that to show both a relatively large system. I didn't include specific numbers for Coachella because I don't have them, but Watsonville was not shy about showing the cost for those systems. I don't want to take up too much more time, so I think that's done, and that will probably take us up to our next speaker.
Thank you so much, Edgar. That was really helpful. And just while Adán Ortega, our next speaker, is getting set up, I just wanted to share one or two questions from our audience, and I'll hold the rest until the end. But could you just reiterate what was the source of the C6 contamination in the Coachella Valley? And then also, is agriculture a source of Chromium 6 contamination?
Again, in that slide from Coachella Valley, the point was that their source from as low as less than 1 part to over 20, considerably higher, 22 parts, is all naturally occurring in the Coachella Valley. And what was the second question?
The second question was, is agriculture a source, and are there any source controls being implemented?
That I'm not entirely certain. Maybe Eric knows, but again, most of the industrial source of chromium-6 comes from like chromium plating type operations, and again, some of the more infamous contamination from PG&E is simply from industrial purposes. They use chromium-6 as a descalant, and that was the source for PG&E's contamination in Hinckley, Topak, and Kettleman City, but that's from an industrial operation. I'm not aware of many agricultural sources.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks again, and we'll turn the floor over to Adán Ortega, Executive Director with California Association of Mutual Water Companies. Thanks for being with us, Adán.
Thank you, and good morning, everybody. And first, I want to thank Katie and all the folks at the Public Health Alliance of Southern California for organizing this and for inviting us to participate. Quickly, the California Association of Mutual Water Companies was founded rather recently in 2013 with about 14 mutual water companies, primarily in the LA area. Since then, we've grown to over 130 dues-paying members from around the state. And in January, we will balloon to about 400 members because of the establishment of a Joint Powers Insurance Authority that was recently signed into law by the governor. And so all of this I mentioned to illustrate the growing sense of desperation that many small systems that have been reticent to get involved with anybody in the past are beginning to feel for what's happening to them as a result of some of the things that we're talking about. Non-compliance with the Safe Drinking Water Act is a skyrocketing trend, but I want to temper that claim by recognizing what I think the State Water Board, which is newly now in charge of the Safe Drinking Water Program, something that we're very happy about on this end, has indicated in their water plan, their Safe Drinking Water Plan in 2015, and that is that compliance with regulations for safe drinking water has been good overall among large agencies. But the universe that we're talking about here are small public water systems, most of which serve less than 200 service connections. And in the regulatory regime, anything over 200 connections is regulated by the state. The reason why those of you around Southern California working for local entities ought to be interested in this is because if a system is under 200 connections, your county health department is responsible for monitoring and making sure that they're in compliance. Going to a universal illustration here, when you look at the total non-compliance, and I took this out of the Safe Drinking Water Plan, in 2012, and this is for a variety of contaminants that include disinfectant byproducts, and it also includes arsenic, nitrates, and a bunch of other things, the total non-compliance number of agencies was about 467. If you look at surveys that were done of compliance through AQUA and AWWA more recently, you'll find that the non-compliance with Hexchrome alone on the standard that's been described by both Edgar and Dr. Miguelino balloons to 332. So that's about a 71% increase in non-compliance in California just in these last few years. If you just consider in our universe of small systems where we're mostly concerned about arsenic and nitrates, it's a 105% increase in non-compliance. That's a huge number and one that we need to take seriously. I'm going to try to change this. My little control thing disappeared. Okay, here we go. So the questions that we need to address is water quality deteriorating in the state? You know, is this what's happening, that these regulations are coming in because water quality is deteriorating? I think Dr. Miguelino made an excellent presentation in illustrating the fact that that's not necessarily the case, that what we're trying to do is reduce risk. But this is a key question because of public expectations for safe drinking water and the reticence of larger public water agencies to address this quagmire for what it is because of the fear of perception that if they mention some of the things I'm going to talk about, that they may be perceived as being against safe drinking water. So that's all not their fault. I used to work at the Metropolitan Water District. I reacted in the same way of not trying to address these things in a direct manner because we didn't want people to believe that we were against safe drinking water. But this is really a matter of advances in detection technology and a regulatory framework that we consider outdated. And we believe that's the case because because when we talk about economic feasibility, it's really relative to the size of a system. So at the 10 parts per billion, you have larger systems like the Coachella Valley Water District, which is impacted. They're looking at about a $500 million price tag in order to comply with the standard. But that's a larger system. For a smaller system, if you strap us right next door at Mayuma Dunes Mutual Water Company, their cost of compliance is about $25 million for the capital, plus whatever the O&M is, which can run as high as $5 million a year. So over a 10-year period, you're talking about an enormous cost for complying with the standard that a smaller community you just can't afford. And it's beyond our wildest imagination to figure out how it is that this can happen and how we could afford it. What this does is that it leaves health officials in a quagmire as the public's perception of risk is warped. There were news reports earlier this year that in communities that have that have levels of hexavalent chromium at above the 10 parts per billion, there's a growing alarm that perhaps the public may not be safe drinking that water. Even though, as has been illustrated earlier during this call, the overall standard for hexavalent chromium was previously sufficiently protected. In the regulation that was just adopted in Canada, that level was determined to be more than sufficiently protective, but things are what they are when it comes to public perception. I already mentioned the issues with small systems, but the main point here is not so much that we want less stringent regulations, it's that the regulations are being enacted in a manner where we can't predict the cost. So if you can't predict the cost, you can't set up the rate structure, you can't set up your interactions with the state when, for example, a water bond is being proposed, because in many cases, the funds that are provided, in these water bonds and so forth are not allowed for compliance. And then, one point, and I won't belabor this too much, is that the cost of treating from parts per million, as it once was, to parts per billion, and then the trend taking us to parts per trillion, are greater by orders of magnitude. Let me just get to the next slide here. So, because of the State Water Resources Control Board's recent assumption of the Safe Drinking Water Plan, we are very hopeful because they are able to write the book anew. And the signals coming from the state board are that they take stakeholders seriously, that they're listening to us, and that they want suggestions that are constructive. And so we welcome that. So what we've been suggesting is a strategic plan for safe drinking water, where we focus on the availability of technology for compliance that's based on affordability, not just on cost-benefit analyses. This is important to us for very practical reasons. Say, for example, Edgar mentioned residuals. One of the big issues with ion exchange in the treatment of hexavalent chromium is that it leaves residual materials that are low-grade radioactive that are considered hazardous waste in California. The handling of those residuals can easily double the cost of treatment. And so those don't get accounted for when we look at the treatment. But if you're going to actually implement one of these remedies, you're going to face that cost. Then the public health goal, for as visionary as it is in trying to reduce risk, it doesn't account for the new risks that are created by the treatment of things resulting in such items as residuals. So what are the risks of the trucks that would be required to haul this material out of a treatment plant? What are the risks to the communities receiving the residuals? And so none of that gets incorporated in this very idealistic manner of trying to reduce one thing. So we believe that there needs to be a more holistic way of assessing risk so that you're not leading us into unintended consequences based upon these public health goals. Another remedy that we believe in is a multi-contaminant approach. So Dr. Miguelino indicated that OEHA reviews their public health goals every 5 years, and it triggers reconsideration of these MCLs, the maximum contaminant levels that are now going to be established by the State Water Board. So what would happen is that, say we have a small system and there's a technology that may allow us to treat 2 or 3 or 4 contaminants. In the case of hexavalent chromium, perhaps you can combine that technology. I understand that it could also be suitable for perchlorate, and perchlorate, the standard for that is undergoing revision right now. But say you had a technology that would deal with both of them. Well, what would happen is that if the standard for perchlorate were to be redone, for lack of a better term, or reset at a lower level where that technology could no longer meet it, then all of a sudden, your costs have just skyrocketed in a manner that you couldn't predict, and that hardware, that capital expense that you took on, could be stranded. So what we would like to see are multi-contaminant approaches so that utilities are governed by timelines where the remedies, and these are the treatment technologies, are validated in some way until the final contaminant that technology is dedicated to is up for review. And then finally, we want to stop alarming the public with what is growingly becoming a false notion of risk. And we believe we need to shift attention to an appreciation for the technical advances that I think our regulators want to utilize to make us all safer, but which I think is generally acknowledged will not probably make us all healthier. And so that's kind of the position that we've taken. My final point is, why does this matter to communities? And let me just go to the last slide if I can here. Okay, why does this matter to communities? It's not only that it affects perception of safety, but that it also is beginning to erode the ability of small systems to leverage the equity and reliability of their system, which compromises their ability to finance improvements, dedicate revenues from sales, to secure loans, to make all of these improvements. So we're coming full circle. So that if you're out of compliance with the new standard, and all of a sudden you basically, these people that issue loans for infrastructure will know that you can't sell that water. Well, then how do you dedicate your sales to be able to finance a loan? It just becomes a spiral that eventually we can't get out of. And so we believe that this is an urgent matter. We believe that the administration is doing its utmost to start addressing this. They're dedicating monies to disadvantaged communities for consolidations and for technical assistance. But the regretful part of this all is that they've inherited a system that, while we may be addressing disadvantaged communities today, like I indicated earlier, this is a skyrocketing trend. And we will find sooner than later that not only do we have to help the disadvantaged communities that are already here, but those that will be emerging as a result of this compounding method of adopting safe drinking water regulations in California. So that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Adán Ortega, for that great presentation. We've got about 10 minutes left. and just wanted to shift gears here and open it up to question and answer and discussion. So we've had a few questions coming in here over the question panel and chat box. But first, just wanted to give a chance to folks to share a question verbally. If anyone feels inclined, please go ahead and unmute yourself, jump into the conversation. And just as a quick reminder here, feel free, you could raise your hand or just go ahead and jump right in. And this is also showing where you can enter a question if you prefer to do it that way. And I'll just ask Larry Fay, you've got your hand raised. Want to go ahead and share?
Yeah, I'll just, I'd like to say really interesting presentation. We've been challenged here in Santa Barbara County with a number of small water systems, the 200 and fewer connections that are faced with the Hexavalent Chromium issue. And a really, I think, interesting discussion for us. I get the feeling, and I haven't talked to a lot of the water users, we've talked to the water mutual water companies. I get the feeling that not only does this whole process create problems for the small utilities in terms of affordability and uncertainty in the future, I'm thinking that when the general public is faced with the costs of the increased treatment, and even if we can provide upfront grant money to disadvantaged communities, there are ongoing operating costs that would be incurred. I'm thinking that folks begin to lose their confidence in the public policymakers' ability to establish realistic standards when we go, I don't want to say blindly forward, but we go forward in the face of these incredible financial hardships to companies. I don't know if any of you have any comments about that?
This is Adán. From the mutual water company perspective, that's already happening. And what I fear, many of these smaller mutual water companies are run by elderly persons that will operate the pumps themselves. And when you look at a problem of this magnitude, for example, it comes down to, can we afford workman's compensation insurance? Because we're going to have to operate a treatment plant. Can we finance the remedy when, the remedy may take time to implement? And then if you're not a disadvantaged community, but you're on the margins, then the question becomes, to what degree can you leverage the equity in your property? Because these mutual water companies are owned by communities, they're owned by neighbors, and they're not for profit. They can only charge cost of service. But if they're going to leverage themselves to try to fix the system, how much can a property be worth when it's been deemed as contaminated because of a new standard? And so that has to change in some way, where we look at what we've accomplished in risk reduction already. I remember Life magazine on the year 2000, back when it existed, declared chlorine as the biggest technological innovation of humankind because it extended our lifespan. But at some point, we're going to have to recalibrate this because I just don't see where this spiral ends.
I'd like to kind of dovetail on what Adán was addressing. This is not a new problem, as I think everyone on the call knows, is that small water systems have had challenges for decades, and we're not even talking about private wells and the difficulties they have. I know there was considerable discussion at the state level. There was an attempt to try and maybe implement a consolidation effort, which the water utility industry, large and small, fought. But maybe the solution might lie in something in between. I know the chief of the drinking water program, Cindy Forbes, has been in discussions to look at partnering with larger systems to help smaller systems. I think even if you don't consolidate, maybe joining forces through maybe a joint powers association to operate these small water systems. There's solutions out there. I think clearly what you're going to need are leaders to kind of step forward and help shepherd these things through. You know, if you were to ask me, I would say, you know, the California, with all of its wealth and innovation, should be able to do something to try and help this problem. But I think, as maybe the tenor of our presentations, is that, you know, compliance with all the other stuff that water systems have to deal with is probably not sustainable, particularly for the small water systems.
Right, great. Well, another question is, you know, given the role of local health departments in regulating the state small water system, what kind of role, or how do you think these local health departments can be or should be showing up to, you know, if anything, to be able to help small systems deal with these issues? Is there anything that local health departments could be doing there?
One of the things that we're trying to do with the California Association of Mutual Water Companies, and we've already done it, is to collect reliable data of which systems are viable. There's a lot of discrepancy, for example, in the state corporation records of which companies actually exist and don't exist. We found companies that are not incorporated that had permits, and we found vice versa as well. And so I think one of the things that the public health departments can do is reach out to groups like ours. There's a lot of environmental justice organizations that are looking at these issues as well, just to know what's going on in their own backyards when it comes to these systems. And then I think they need to appreciate that there may be an avalanche coming of what I call abandoned systems. And these are systems where, like as I mentioned, some of these systems are run by elderly people. They can't find people to join their boards anymore. There's no younger people in the communities that are interested in running the system, and they don't have the financial strength to leverage themselves without shifting costs to the larger system that might take them in. And so I think being aware of that is a beginning point, because then that becomes what you go talk to legislators and the administration about.
Oh, that sounds like a very serious issue. Did someone else want to chime in on that? Was that you, Larry?
Yeah, this is Larry again. You really hit one of the concerns, or hit on the head one of the concerns I have about the small water systems is for some of them, the real option might be just to give up. They're out there, they're serving water, and it's, so what are you going to do, you know? Or they just abandon it altogether and leave all of their users on their own, which is not a very desirable outcome either.
Yep.
Great. Well, I think we are going to have to leave it there. I just wanted to take a couple of quick minutes to wrap us up here. So just wanted to take a minute again to thank our speakers, our wonderful speakers today, for sharing such great information with us in such a clear and articulate way. So thank you again, Dr. Eric Miguelino, Edgar Daimele, and Adán Ortega for sharing with us. I just wanted to remind everybody that we will be sharing both the webinars, the slide presentations, and there were also a few questions that we didn't get to, so we'll try and get those answered and send them out with our follow-up email next week. And I also just wanted to take a quick moment to thank Angelo Bellomo. He was unable to join us to moderate today because of an emergency in LA County, but Angelo has been just such a wonderful partner and support on the series, and we're so grateful to his thought leadership. And we'll be sending out a small thank you package to Angelo, including this beautiful t-shirt, which we're trying to determine if that's accurate or not, but I wouldn't be surprised. So many, many thanks to you, Angelo. And lastly, just pointing out that this is the last webinar that's specifically targeted for environmental health, but our final webinar of the series next month will be bringing all three tracks of our webinar series back together: environmental health, nutrition, and health leadership. And we'll be looking at kind of overarching actions and summarizing what local health departments, what the opportunities are here. So on that note, I hope you can join us on November 18th. This is a different day and time. It's from 12 to 1. And thank you all so much for being on here. Here's a link to where slides will be posted, and feel free to contact me at this information if you would like or have any questions. And thank you again, everybody. Take care and have a great day.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.